Welcome to the Empowered Mind podcast with Joelle and Natalie Rivera. We are on a never-ending quest to master the power of our mind, develop a growth mindset, and explore the leading edge of positive psychology and human potential so we can take radical personal responsibility for creating our destinies and reaching our potential.
So let me ask you, what are your non-negotiables?
What are those things in your life that you either absolutely know for sure you cannot tolerate long-term, or the things that you absolutely must have? And when we're talking about this, we're going to use relationships as an example because it's the easiest place to apply it. But the truth is that you're going to have non-negotiables in all areas of your life, but they're only relevant if you actually identify and commit to them. But the truth is, even if you don't commit to them and you get wishy-washy and you allow things in your life that weren't negotiable, but you negotiated anyway, the truth is you're never going to be able to tolerate them. You're not going to be able to deal with it because in your heart, they're not negotiable.
And really, when you have a lot of non-negotiables in your life that you're still dealing with because you haven't made it clear that it's a non-negotiable, then what tends to happen is that you create a lot of unnecessary stress in your life. You create a lot of problems in relationships with other people around you, with your career, with your business and things like that. So now you said we're going to focus on relationships, but it's really applicable to everything in life. See, let's say if you're single, before you meet this person that you might be like your knight in shining armor, whatever it is, in your relationship, you might first meet this person. They might seem perfect. And then all of a sudden, a year from now, everything starts crumbling. You might ask why that happened. Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is because when you first meet someone, you're basically in the same mindset of somebody who's schizophrenic because you have so many chemicals, that in-love feeling that just swoops you up that you might not see maybe some of the negative things, some of the things that were non-negotiable that you weren't clear about.
Red flag. And so we're blinded to these red flags when we're in that in love experience, but it can happen in other aspects of life because most people don't take the time to really be honest about what is and isn't negotiable. So for instance, if you are single, what you would want to do is look back at the experiences you've had in your life in relationships. And if you're super young and you haven't had one before, you can be just looking back at relationships you've observed or the relationships in your family and come up with what are the things you absolutely know for sure must be within this person that you want to be with. Character traits that are absolutely mandatory or aspects of the relationship that are absolutely mandatory. And so those are the positive aspects. And at the same time, what are the things you just won't tolerate? So one thing for a majority of people is they will not tolerate being physically abused. So that one might be more obvious, but everybody has things that are very specific to them that they know they absolutely can't tolerate. And it's not just like, I don't want this. It's that I know if I tolerated this, I wouldn't be able to tolerate it long-term because at my core, I just can't negotiate on this topic. And that's what we're after here.
And like I said, even, for example, for me, with time, I started developing non-negotiable things, for example, for our business or when I was looking for a job before I had a business, when I would apply for a job, I actually wrote down things that I would not want to negotiate, whether it was somebody that was constantly like checking up every single detail that I would do, micromanaging, or people that did not value their staff or the flexibility that they gave people within the staff for family and different needs that they might have. You know, I would have all these non-negotiables for me, especially respect, also within the work environment. So I would assess some of those things. Because to me, that was non-negotiable. If I saw those things happening, I would not work for that company whatsoever. And even for our business, really, when we started looking at our business, what we wanted to create, a lot of things was, you know, that freedom, that flexibility that we wanted to create. We didn't want to be slaves to our business. So we had certain non-negotiables that we created within that. So whatever it is in your life where you're trying to create a business, where you're trying to change careers, whether you have a relationship or are going to be looking for a relationship, you need to really write down at least 10 things that for you are non-negotiable, that are things that you would not put up with, that you would not want to deal with long-term.
And so coming back to the relationship example, the reason why it's so important to know these things is because it is really easy to compromise. And of course, in any situation where you are working or living with another person. There's going to be areas you compromise. But the problem is most people tend to compromise too much. They compromise on the things that are not compromisable. And so you can't just lay down and take it. You can't just be inauthentic and expect a relationship or any other aspect of life to work if you're not living in integrity with yourself. So non-negotiables are really about integrity. It's about being honest with yourself. And so you don't have to be honest with the other people. You have to be honest with yourself. And actually, on a side note here, if you're in a relationship and you create a non-negotiable list, the goal is to say with yourself, you know what? There's certain aspects of this relationship that I know need to change in order for me to stay in it long term. And in some situations, they might be things you can address, but there are some times where you don't want to share your non-negotiable list with another person because then the person can just pretend to be what you want. So it's not about the other person. It's about you. It's about you knowing what you will and will not tolerate and you knowing what you want and what you're not willing to live without.
And especially at the beginning of a relationship, because what tends to happen is that when you have that in-love feeling where all the chemicals are going crazy, then you're trying to meet each other's needs, but sometimes that's not sustainable for that person who they really are. So really the point of the non-negotiable is to be able to see people for who they are. Because what happens long-term is that people have non-negotiables, they're not concrete on those non-negotiables, and they think that they could change the other person, just like they think that they could change their work or whatever it may be. Because at first is that newness that changes. So it's just critical to write it down and sometimes reflect on them. For example, I wrote down my non-negotiables and then I took time to reflect on them. And I really realized that out of those 10 things that I wrote down, that maybe 2 of them were really negotiable. They weren't really that necessary for me to say that this would work out. And that's what's important. It's not something, you write the list, you put it somewhere, you spend some time reflecting on it, and just be very clear. Because again, at the end of the day, if you are negotiating on your non-negotiables, it might work short term, but long term, that relationship, that career, that business is not going to work because at your core, it is a non-negotiable. And whether you like it or not, things are going to push you to the extent that you're going to have to call it quits because it's not going to work for you or them.
And so we're not talking about a wish list. We're talking about a list of absolute musts. And what's wonderful about this, not only does this give you a guiding light to be able to make the decisions about what is and is not a good fit for you in your life, but it gives you the clarity to know what you really want, which makes decisions easier. It makes you more motivated because you're clear about what you're doing it for. Thank you, fellow Freedom Junkies, for listening. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And if you want to help us grow, please rate and share this podcast. You can also become a member of Freedom Nation. Visit freedomorbustpodcast.com and sign up to receive access to exclusive content and take the 21-day happiness challenge. As you know, we believe that entrepreneurship is the ultimate form of empowerment, which is why we created the Side Hustle Business Startup course for anyone looking to create their own income and take back their power. We offer an exclusive discount for our podcast listeners. Find out more at freedomorbustpodcast.com.